Hello and welcome to the 8th episode of the Nexuiz in-depth video podcast. My name is Mario Shekov, aka Green Marine, and today I will show you how the font system of Nexuiz works and how you can change the fonts for the particular parts of the heads-up display. The level of difficulty is intermediate. Before I start to tell you more about the command to change the fonts, I'd like to show you what the fonts actually are in Nexuiz. Some of you might know that there are different formats for fonts, such as the TrueType format or the OpenType or PostScript format. The advantage of these font formats is that they are vector-based and can be scaled up or down without losing quality by a so-called font render engine. If I lost you now, never mind, this will not be important in the upcoming part. The thing is that for performance and licensing issues, the fonts distributed in Nexuiz are not in any of the formats I just mentioned, but instead are shipped as image files. As a matter of fact, Nexuiz comes with only two different fonts. The first one is the console font, here you can see its image, and the second one is the font used when chatting, and is also used in the menu. It is the sans serif font, which you can see here. These images are saved in the TGA format. The console font is found in the JFX folder inside the big Nexuiz archive file that is in your data folder and is called conchars.tga. The sans serif font is also in that folder, but is called verasans.tga. You will notice that there is also a verasans big TGA file. This font is equal to verasans, but is a sharper version of it. It is used only for stuff written in big font sizes, such as the scoreboard heading when you open the scoreboard, and makes sure that this stuff doesn't look too blurry. You can have a look at these files yourself by extracting them from the archive file and opening them in a picture editing program, such as GIMP or Photoshop or any other program that allows you to display the so-called alpha channel of the image. Okay, let's finally go over to change the font for a couple of things. For this, you have to use the command load font. The syntax is load font, then the area you want to affect, and then the path to the TGA file relative to your data folder. For the moment, we don't know how to create a TGA file for other external fonts, so the only thing we can do at the moment is to replace, for example, the console font with the already existing sans serif font, and vice versa. But this should be enough to demonstrate the usage for now. Here you can see a list of the areas for which you can change the font. Before I go through these, I would like to add another comment. In the last episode, I told you how you could configure the font sizes of the scoreboard, and before also for center prints. There are a couple more things that are interesting to configure. First, there is the scr_con alpha setting. If you set it to 0, the black background of the console will completely become invisible, I mean transparent. If you set it to 1, the background will be completely black, as in non-transparent. You can also use floating values between 0 and 1, for example 0.5, to set the background to be 50% transparent. Apart from that, I'd recommend that you investigate the variables starting with con, for example by using the Advanced Settings menu. Particularly interesting might be the con_chat and con_notify variables that affect the chat area and the notify area, about which I'll tell you more in a second. Just read through the descriptions of the variables to find out what each of them does. Okay, back to the load font command. I'll now go through each of the areas and do a quick demonstration. Let's start with the console area. By default, it uses the console font Conchars. By entering load font console JFX/verasans, I can change the font to be the verasans font. I added this JFX/ because the verasans TGA file is actually in that folder, or at least it's in the folder structure inside the big data archive file. What you'll notice is that the font gets a little bit smaller, but this doesn't matter as you can increase the font size of the console by changing the variable con_text size. Next, I'm altering the chat font. Here you can see a screenshot of a few lines I said shown in the chat area. Once I enter load font, chat, jfx/conchars, the chat area now looks like this. I know, that doesn't really look good, but this is just a demonstration anyway. Next, I'd like to show the center print area. You might believe that you know where this area is, as you already know what a center print is. There is a little problem though. To summarize it, if you change the font of this center print area, you'll notice that the center prints, for example, the message of the day, still use the old font. In fact, since Nexuiz 2.5, this center print area is not really used anymore in the game. If you wanted to change the center print in Nexuiz 2.5, you'd have to change the font for the area called user1 that I'll deal with later. However, if you play back Nexuiz 2.4 demos, for example, the font you set for this center print area is actually used again. The reason for all of this is simply the fact that the technical way of processing center prints that the server sends to you changed between the version 2.4 and 2.5. Now more about the info bar area. Here the font will change at several places. First, at the bottom of the screen at the actual info bar. You see it, for example, when you create a game and you see the loading bar at the bottom, or when you download a map from a server that you are connecting to. Second, the font also changes at places that show you statistics such as your frames per second, the current time, date, and speed meter. You can enable all these statistics in the Settings menu under the MISC tab. Now the Notify area. By default, this area is at the top of your screen and shows you notifications, for example when you picked up a weapon. The Notify area is almost as customizable as the chat area, so please have a look at the Advanced Settings menu, filtering for the .notify or .chat variables. By default, this area uses the Vera Sans font, and entering load font notify jfx/conchars switches it to use the console font. Oh yeah, that looks ugly, doesn't it? Now the user 0 area. This area is simply the menu. Here I set the used menu font to Conchars, the console font. Yeah, that looks brilliant. The user 1 area affects different parts of the heads-up display. To identify them easily, just switch the font to the console font. First and most important of all, it affects the looks of the scoreboard, as you can see here, and it also affects the looks of center prints, as I told you previously. It probably affects even more smaller parts, but these are the most important ones. The user 2 area, as far as I know, only affects the scoreboard heading that you see when you have the scoreboard opened. Alright, we just got through all these columns. One important thing you need to keep in mind, also for the next episode, is that the font you changed are not saved. If you want to achieve that, simply write the load font command into your autoexec config file. Alright, I think this should do for now, and in the next episode I'll explain how you can create your own font TJA file out of TrueType fonts. But I have to warn you, it is quite difficult and I'll have to make explanations really short, otherwise the length would become too long. So that episode will be in fact the first one being at expert level. This was Green Marine for the Alien Trap development team. Have a good time and see you next week.